2008, Jim Miller and his brother Dan joined the UFC in July 2008. Jim made his debut at UFC 89, where he fought David Barron. In the third round, Jim locked in a submission hold, making Barron tap out. This earned Jim his first Submission of the Night bonus, a big achievement for his debut fight. Later that year, Jim stepped in on short notice to replace Frankie Edgar and fought Matt Wyman at UFC. Fight for the Troops. Jim dominated Wyman for all 3 rounds. His strikes and takedowns were on point, and the judges all gave him the win with scores like 30-27. The fight was so exciting that both fighters were given the Fight of the Night bonus. 2009. Jim's first fight of the year was against Gray Maynard at UFC 96. Gray was known for his wrestling and tough style. Jim fought hard but lost the fight after 3 rounds, with the judges giving Maynard the unanimous decision. Jim bounced back later that year at UFC 100, where he fought Mac Danzig, a past winner of The Ultimate Fighter. Jim controlled the fight with his grappling and striking, leaving no doubt in the judges' minds. He won every round and took home another unanimous decision victory. Jim was supposed to fight Thiago Tavares at UFC 103, but Tavares got injured. Instead, Jim faced Steve Lopez. The fight was competitive, but in the second round, Lopez hurt his shoulder and Jim took advantage to win. 2010. Jim had a busy year in 2010, starting at UFC 108, where he was supposed to fight Tyson Griffin. Tyson got injured, so Jim faced veteran Duane Ludwig. Jim looked great in the fight, even knocking Ludwig down with a quick combo. He didn't waste any time and finished the fight with an armbar submission in the first round. At UFC 111, Jim had a tough battle against Mark Bocek. Both fighters exchanged strikes and grappling positions in a closely contested fight. After 3 rounds, Jim edged out a unanimous decision win. Later in the year, Jim faced Gleison Tibau at UFC Fight Night 22. Jim's striking and improved footwork helped him outpoint Tibau for another unanimous decision win. Jim's last fight of the year was against Charles Oliveira at UFC 124. Oliveira was an exciting new prospect, but Jim shocked everyone by submitting him with a knee bar in the first round. The move was so impressive that it earned him another Submission of the Night bonus. 2011. Jim started 2011 with a fight against Kamal Shaloris at UFC 128. Kamal was known for his strong wrestling, but Jim showcased his striking skills, landing an uppercut and a knee to Kamal's face. In the third round, Jim finished the fight with a TKO, adding another impressive win to his record. In the summer, Jim faced Benson Henderson at UFC on Versus 5. Benson was a former WEC champion and brought a lot of energy into the fight. Jim struggled as Benson used his speed and grappling to control the match. After 3 rounds, Jim lost the fight by unanimous decision. Later, Jim revealed he was dealing with a kidney infection and mononucleosis, which made his weight cut and performance even tougher. 2012. Jim's first fight of the year was against Melvin Gaillard at UFC on FX1. Melvin started strong, landing big punches and knees that rocked Jim in the first round. But Jim stayed calm and managed to take the fight to the ground. Once there, he locked in a rear naked choke, forcing Melvin to tap out. This win earned Jim another Submission of the Night bonus. Next, Jim headlined UFC on Fox, Diaz vs. Miller against Nate Diaz. Nate was an excellent grappler with long reach. In the second round, Nate caught Jim in a guillotine choke and submitted him. This was the first time Jim had ever been submitted in his professional career. To close the year, Jim stepped in for an injured fighter and faced Joe Lauzon at UFC 155. The fight was a war, with both fighters giving it everything they had. Jim's striking and grappling earned him the unanimous decision win. The fight was so entertaining that it won Fight of the Night honors. 2013. Jim started 2013 with a fight against Pat Healy at UFC 159. It was a back-and-forth battle, with both fighters landing big strikes and takedowns. Jim eventually lost the fight by submission in the third round. However, after the fight, Healy tested positive for marijuana, and the result was changed to a no contest. Later that year, Jim faced Fabricio Camoes at UFC 168. The two were supposed to fight years earlier, but the match was canceled. This time, Jim made sure to dominate. In the first round, he locked in an armbar submission, forcing Fabricio to tap out. 2014. Jim kicked off 2014 with a fight against Yancy Medeiros at UFC 172. Yancy stepped in on short notice, but Jim quickly took control. He secured a guillotine choke in the first round, earning another submission win. In the summer, Jim fought Donald Cowboy Cerrone at UFC Fight Night 45. The first round was competitive, with both fighters landing strikes. However, In the second round, Cerrone landed a clean head kick that knocked Jim out, handing him a tough loss. 2015. Jim was scheduled to face Paul Felder at UFC on Fox 15, but Felder pulled out due to an injury. Instead, Jim fought Beneil Dariush. Jim fought hard, but Dariush's grappling and striking earned him a unanimous decision win. Later in the year, Jim faced Danny Castillo at UFC on Fox 16. It was a close fight, with both men exchanging strikes and takedowns. In the end, Jim won by split decision. However, his final fight of the year was against Michael Chiesa at UFC Fight Night 80. Chiesa submitted Jim with a rear naked choke in the second round. Even though Jim lost, the fight was so exciting that it earned Fight of the Night honors. 2016. Jim opened 2016 with a fight against Diego Sanchez at UFC 196. Diego was known for his wild, aggressive style, and the two had a hard-fought battle. After 3 rounds, Jim lost by unanimous decision. He bounced back at UFC 200 where he faced Takanori Gomi. Jim wasted no time, taking Gomi down and winning by TKO in the first round. Just weeks later, Jim had a rematch against Joe Lauzon at UFC on Fox 21. The fight was another close one, but Jim edged out a split decision win, earning his 5th Fight of the Night bonus. In November, Jim faced Thiago Alves at UFC 205. Alves missed weight, making the fight a catchweight bout. Despite the drama, Jim stayed focused and won the fight by unanimous decision. 2017. Jim started 2017 with a tough fight against Dustin Poirier at UFC 208. This was a thrilling back-and-forth battle where both fighters had big moments. Dustin used his sharp striking, while Jim relied on his grappling and toughness. After 3 exciting rounds, Dustin won by majority decision. Despite the loss, the fight was so entertaining that it earned both men the Fight of the Night bonus. In the summer, Jim faced former lightweight champion Anthony Pettis at UFC 213. Pettis showcased his creative striking and controlled most of the fight. Jim had a few good moments, but Pettis ultimately won by unanimous decision. Later that year, Jim took on Francisco Trinaldo at UFC Fight Night 119. Trinaldo used his strength and powerful striking to keep Jim on the defensive, leading to another unanimous decision loss for Jim. 2018. Jim's first fight of 2018 was against rising star Dan Hooker at UFC Fight Night 128. Hooker's striking proved to be too much as he knocked Jim out in the first round with a brutal knee. This was a tough loss for Jim, but he bounced back later in the year. In September, Jim faced Alex White at UFC 228. Jim looked sharp, dropping White with punches before locking in a rear naked choke to secure the submission win in the first round. This victory marked Jim's 30th fight in the UFC and made him the first fighter in history to achieve that milestone. In December, Jim had a rematch with Charles Oliveira at UFC on Fox 31. This time, Oliveira submitted Jim with a rear naked choke in the first round. 2019. Jim began 2019 by facing Jason Gonzalez at UFC Fight Night, Jacare vs. Hermanson. Jim controlled the fight and won with a first-round rear naked choke. Later, Jim fought Clay Guida at UFC on ESPN 5. This matchup didn't last long, as Jim quickly caught Guida in a guillotine choke. Guida was unable to escape, giving Jim another first-round submission win. This victory further cemented Jim's status as one of the best submission artists in the lightweight division. 2020. Jim's first fight of 2020 was against Scott Holtzman at UFC Fight Night 167. The bout was a back-and-forth war, with both fighters landing big shots. In the end, Scott won by unanimous decision, but the fight earned Jim his 7th Fight of the Night bonus for his incredible effort. In June, Jim faced Roosevelt Roberts at UFC Fight Night, Blades vs. Volkov. Jim displayed his grappling expertise, locking in an armbar and forcing Roberts to tap out in the first round. This win earned Jim another Performance of the Night bonus. However, in August, Jim faced Vince Pichel at UFC 252 and lost by unanimous decision. 2021. Jim was scheduled to fight Bobby Green at UFC 258, but Green collapsed after weigh-ins and the fight was canceled. Jim returned in April to face Joe Selecki at UFC on ABC2. Despite putting up a strong fight, Jim lost by unanimous decision. In October, Jim fought Eric Gonzalez at UFC Fight Night 195. Jim showcased his striking power, knocking Gonzalez out early in the second round. This win earned him another Performance of the Night bonus and proved that Jim still had plenty of fight left in him. 2022. Jim faced Nicholas Mota at UFC Fight Night 201 in February. After a competitive first round, Jim landed powerful strikes in the second round to win by TKO. With this victory, Jim tied Donald Cerrone for the most wins in UFC history at 23. Later, Jim was booked to fight Donald Cerrone at UFC 276 in July. The fight was a rematch years in the making, and Jim made history by submitting Cerrone with a guillotine choke in the second round. This win set a new record for the most UFC victories, with Jim achieving his 24th win. 2023. Jim started 2023 by facing Alexander Hernandez at UFC Fight Night 219. Despite a strong effort, Jim lost by unanimous decision. In June, Jim fought Jesse Butler at UFC on ESPN 46 after Butler stepped in as a last-minute replacement. Jim wasted no time, knocking Butler out just 23 seconds into the first round. This stunning performance earned Jim another Performance of the Night bonus. 2024. Jim kicked off 2024 by facing Gabriel Benitez at UFC Fight Night 234. He dominated the fight and won by face crank submission in the third round, earning his 26th UFC win and another Performance of the Night bonus. In April, Jim made history by fighting at UFC 300, becoming the only fighter to compete at UFC 100, UFC 200, and UFC 300. He faced King Green and lost by unanimous decision, but his longevity and achievements in the sport were celebrated by fans and fighters alike. In November, Jim fought Damon Jackson at UFC 309. Jim showed his legendary submission skills, winning via guillotine choke in the first round. This victory marked his 27th UFC win, further extending his record for the most wins in the promotion's history.